Survive Societal Collapse Guide to Picking a Bug Out Location. If you want to survive a societal collapse, start looking for a bug out location, preferably to move there full time. I just recently moved, about a year ago, moved to the Florida Panhandle, so I'm on the hunt for a new bug out location. After doing hours of research on the internet, I concluded that there isn't a perfect bug out location, but some locations are better than others. So let's take a look at what I found. What is a bug out location for societal collapse? A bug out location is a remote acreage located in an area with minimal population density. The location is set up to provide water, food, fuel, shelter, and security during times of emergency such as a natural disaster or societal collapse. The location could be your home or a secondary location. And that definition is subjective, right? So you could have a bug out location that's different, but that, to me, that's the ideal. If you had a choice, that's the ideal kind of bug out location. There are only 9 meals between mankind and anarchy. Alfred Henry Lewis. What a bug out location is not. A bug out location isn't a temporary location such as a family or friends where you can go for a short-term safety. The type of emergency location is not set up for you to survive long-term and shit hits the fan. It's a location where you do not have ownership or control. Remember, we're talking about worst-case scenarios here. Imagine bugging out to someone's house, somebody else's house rather, and eating their food. How long until you've worn out your welcome? What if things reach the tipping point and mass starvation sets in? You will be at someone else's mercy for your survival. So I would avoid that. If you're interested in this subject, you might also like Ready Squirrel's comprehensive article, 26 Ways to Prepare for Societal Collapse. And you can find that on readysquirrel.com. I'll put the link down below in the video of the comments. Picking a bug out retreat for societal collapse, 26 elements to consider. This is basically a summary of everything else. So if you're only interested in one simple section, just go to readysquirrel.com, look for the article, and scroll down. All-season shelter, buy land early in the prepping process, how much property you need, maximum distance, climate, water supply, redundancy, food storage and preservation, survival garden, soil type, population density, natural hazards, HOAs, covenants, land restrictions and land use, purchasing property, security, rural crime, camouflage, shooting range, fuel and power, topography, move or bug out, transportation, communication, people, hidden supply catches, hygiene, and sanitation. I've tried to keep this pretty comprehensive, but at the same time, not too long. You could write a book on this stuff. And to be honest, a lot of this is theoretical. You'd have to actually live through this to give definitive answers, but I think you can be pretty objective and at least get halfway there. Bug out shelter for all seasons. A bug out shelter provides long-term protection from the worst weather likely during all 4 seasons. To ensure a healthy state of mind, the shelter should also provide basic creature comfort such as warm, comfortable place to sleep, running water, and a feeling of safety. It's okay to have a temporary shelter like a tent, but that isn't ideal for long term because it doesn't provide the creature comforts for sitting out a major emergency event that could last for years. If you don't think a collapse is possible, do some research on Venezuela. If you're looking for survival acreage, try to find land that has a sound structure on it, like a shed or a barn, or a small structure that was built as an off-grid retreat or a hunting shelter. Often purchasing this type of acreage doesn't charge for the cost of the structure that's already there. That way, if you want to get started on a survival garden, if you want to start planting fruit trees, if you want to spend the weekends there while you're retrofitting or you start building, you'll have a place that you can lock up. You can keep your tools and any of your items that have value, and you can stay out of the weather. I don't have a vested interest in these, but my favorite websites to look for land, landandfarm.com and Landwatch. Be wary because you can really go down the rabbit hole looking at property. I searched the state where I'm looking for acreage, and I found 10 listings with 10 plus acres for around 20K. I keep in mind I haven't set foot on any of this land yet, so it may be marsh. For a bug out shelter, you can use many structure types as long as they're properly insulated and heated in cold weather. Excuse me. And heated in cold weather climates. Following are 16 bug out shelter ideas. Garden utility shed, my favorite inexpensive method of creating a mini cabin. Build a shed from scratch or purchase a kit. A 15 by 15 shed, well insulated with a loft, bunk beds, and a wood burning stove. Take it a step further, create a bug out compound with multiple sheds, each for a specific purpose. Shipping containers. Shipping containers are favored by preppers that want to go subterranean. If you plan to bury them, know that shipping containers are only strong in the corners, so they need to be reinforced before you bury them. I suggest before you bury a container, consult an engineer, a building engineer, to figure out reinforcement, how much load the containers can handle, and how deep you can go. And there are some pretty awesome shipping container shelters out there. Yurts are inexpensive tent-like structures preferred by the Mongols, Genghis Khan. They're cool, and 90% of rural Mongolians still live in yurts full time. Cabin tent. If I choose a cabin tent as a bug out shelter, it'd have to be temporary or it'd have to be super heavy duty. I don't like the idea of leaving a tent unsecured, especially if I don't live on site. There are higher grade cabins that accept a pipe for a wood burning stove, and that's what you probably have to go with long term. Camp trailer. Go with a camp trailer, but leave it in place. The chance that you will abandon your vehicle in a serious conflagration is high. Drag it behind you during an event, and you might be forced to leave your bug out shelter on a gridlock freeway or at a security checkpoint. I met a guy in New Mexico who parked his trailer on 20 acres and then built an elaborate structure over the top of the trailer to keep the elements out. The compound had a deck, a gravity-fed shower, a water catchment system, and a place to put table and chairs. Pretty nice setup that drastically expanded living space. So you think outside the box. There's different things you can do that are pretty cool. Take that a step further, build out additional sheds, heated shelters, and other outbuildings. So you could use a situation like that where you've got a shelter on 20 acres. You build a frame, you build a deck, so you got a place to hang out. You're protected from weather, and then you can start building, just stick-built dimensional structures, or you could start dropping logs depending on where the land is again, and start getting them seasoned up for the next year. Line shack or plywood outbuilding. Excuse me. Line shacks aren't much different from a shed concept. You have more choices in setup and dimensions. Another thing to consider if you're going to build something on site, especially if it's off grid or out and away from general populace. My father and I built an off-grid cabin in New Mexico, and it was tough getting materials to the building site. We used concrete footings and dimensional lumber to build the cabin. And when we built it, it was a 60-mile round trip to get to the closest building supply store that wasn't open half the time. And we did have a load of lumber delivered, and the flatbed got stuck coming up off the land, and then the next guy wouldn't do it. So they dropped the load further down. It was kind of in a mountainous, hilly area. They dropped the load further down the road that took to get into the cabin lot that we were building on, and we had to ferry all that lumber with an old pickup truck, and it was a pain in the butt. Tiny buildings, kind of a prefab house on a trailer, very fashionable these days. These kind of structures tend to be fancy and higher end inside. Not something I'd go for, but if you're if you're a guy that wants to prep and have a prepping location and your wife's not too into it, you could sell a bug out location as a weekend retreat and just make it a little bit fancier if you can afford it. Tarp system is it's like a tent, only for temporary shelter while building something more permanent on site. Heavy-duty guide tent, similar to a cabin tent, usually pretty tough with lots of headroom, 4-season. and the ability to place a wood-burning stove inside. You see a lot of these used up, different kinds used up, like in Canada. I've seen a lot of guys that do like bushcraft and stuff, do videos on that. Bushcraft shelter, built with natural materials. This is what we all would like to do. If you're going to go this route, you probably do want to have like a shed on site, something that you can, put a couple cots in and bed down and put some tools in. You've seen the YouTube videos of guys building Viking longhouses, small cabins, or other structures from logs cut on site. Building this way is an inexpensive but labor-intensive way to build a very nice bug-out shelter. And yeah, it definitely has a cool factor. Consider putting a shed in place before building this type of structure. Okay, we already talked about that. Quonset hut. If you thought about living in a big industrial apartment with an elevator for your motorcycle, you might look into Quonset huts. A lot of wide open space and storage. First used in World War II, metal structures made from galvanized steel with a half-cylinder profile. I love these. A ton of room. There are some really cool next level structures that people have built out of these on YouTube, so do a search. If you're going to live in a Quonset hut, I would suggest compartmentalizing the interior with dimensional lumber and drywall. At least create a couple spaces that you can heat. Smaller spaces are easier to heat. Military surplus shelters, big tents, small tents, Quonset huts, instant shelters of every shape and form. There are many types of military surplus shelters you can look into. I don't think I actually put it on here because I couldn't find a lot of good information. But if you're into it, you could do some research. There are actually shelters out there. They're like canvas, but they're impregnated with some kind of special concrete. So you put them up, and then you spray them, you douse them with water, and the shelter basically becomes like a concrete tent or Quonset hut or whatever type of shelter you happen to go with. So look into that. I should probably do some more research on that and do a specific article. Barn or upgraded utility building. Okay, so this is cool. I've seen a lot of these when I've been looking at land. It's the ads, the real estate ads are actually marketed as land only. They're not being sold as dwellings. And a lot of these acreages actually have like old barns and buildings that are still in pretty good shape on them. I actually found one that was a pretty crude but pretty well done off-the-grid shack system that was set up for like a portable Honda generator. So these guys were going on this acreage and deer hunting, but they had everything pre-wired, like LED lights. They had some dimensional lumber cots set up. So when you're looking at land, consider land that already has a structure on it, because it's not included in the price of the land. Whereas if you get a cabin that's a real cabin that's or a house that's full blown, you're gonna pay for the land and for the dwelling. So an old barn with big heavy beams would make an excellent bug out structure. And how cool would that be? Hunting cabins or hunting camps also tend to have this type of structure on them. Down here in the south, I'm in what you call Floribama. I'm in the panhandle of Florida. And so Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, into Texas, this area down here, we got a lot of swampy hunting areas and stuff like that. Pretty cool areas, actually. The hardest thing I'm finding with finding a bug out location for myself is finding a place with good soil, because it's basically the peninsula all the way up into Alabama is just one big sandbank. Hunting cabin, build a hunting cabin or purchase land that has one built. If the cabin is in place and hooked up on running water and electricity, it's going to cost more. Fifth wheel is basically the same as a camp trailer, but bigger and more expensive. If you go this route, again, leave your trailer at the bug out location. Sailboat, this sounds like he's just trying to add to the list. Actually, I'm not. I live in the Florida Panhandle, and I sail. This is definitely an option. One problem I have with sailboats is you're basically going to become a hunter-gatherer. You're not going to be a farmer. There's thousands and thousands of miles of coastal waterways here. There's inland waterways here, fishing, coastal, creatures. I think the challenge would be food, but a sailboat is definitely an option, at least for transportation. And I say down here, ideally you'll have an island and a sailboat, maybe in the next life. Underground bunkers that are professionally installed cost a mint. Consider doing it yourself with reinforced Connex boxes. I like the idea of having 1 or 2 Connex boxes buried and hidden, but I wouldn't want to live in this kind of structure on my bug house as my main bug out shelter. Life is too short to live in a hole. Connex box, same as a shipping container, big metal box buried bunker style, or used above ground for storage or retrofitted as a shelter. The cool thing about Connex boxes is you can cut and weld multiple boxes together to make bigger structures, and you can stack them. There's a really cool YouTube channel, Andrew Camarada. He's a guy that uses he redoes roadways and clears lots and stuff, really mechanical, uses a lot of heavy equipment, and he actually built a castle out of Connex boxes. Very cool. TPs feel too impermanent for a full-time shelter, but I can see using one as a temporary shelter. I mean, the Plains Indians did live in them full-time, so I mean, it's doable if it interests you. If you're thinking about preparing for SHTF, you might be interested in the Ready Squirrel article, Societal Collapse, The Road to Self-Reliance, and I'll put a link down in the comments. Buy land early in the prepping process to incorporate emergency supplies and logistics into the overall emergency plan. Bug out property, how much land do you need? This is going to be based on what your budget is, where you live, what's available. I feel that you need at least 10 acres of property to sustain a bug out, to sustain bug out requirements for food, lumber, security, hunting, and various topography for a bug out location. One exception to this guideline is smaller acreage adjacent to a national forest or a large tract of land that won't be built on. 6 considerations for how much land to purchase. So I should back up. How much land do you need for a bug out location? How much land can you afford so that it doesn't put you out? If you can't afford any land, then your bug out location may actually be a tract of national forest or state land. So that is an option. Just because you can't afford bug out land doesn't mean you don't have a bug out location. It's just not going to have the same perks and usability that you're going to have with a dedicated location that you own or that you have a mortgage on. So the things to consider when you're going to buy bug out land: mortgage and property taxes, soil arability, how much timber you'll use, room for livestock, room for buildings and enclosures, and raising animals and gardening and farming. I'm not going to read all those. Again, you can go to readysquirrel.com. You can read the article if you're interested. Maximum distance from home. Everyone agrees that a bug out location should be as close to your house as you can get. One size fits all. Distances doesn't really work unless you have a location within that distance or can move. The general rule of thumb for maximum distance to a bug out location is 1 tank of gas or 60 miles on foot. I don't know who came up with that, but hey, it's a starting point, so let's run with it. 1 tank of gas, 60 miles on foot. Increase these distances depending on budget and location. Ideal distance from your bug out location is actually 0 miles, so moving to a rural spot and setting up before things go belly up is ideal. During major catastrophes or civil unrest, curfews, do not travel orders, and lockdowns are likely. Under these circumstances, the only way to move safely from point A to point B is probably on foot. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has contingencies in their plans to stop cars and have people move out on foot, so plan for the eventuality of hiking to your bug out camp. If your camp is 2,000 miles away, you're hiking 2,000 miles unless you can find another vehicle along the way. Bug out locations and dangerous routes. So I actually think that this is almost more important than distance, relatively speaking, everything being the same or being equal. Don't just consider distance to your camp. Think about dangerous areas in between where you are and where you're going. With a bug out, with a bug out and the essentials. I don't know what the heck, that's a typo. So anyway, it could take 2 weeks to arrive safely at a retreat on foot by avoiding dangerous area, like main roads and heavily populated areas. And it could take 1 hour to travel by vehicle through a dangerous, highly populated area, and you just won't make it to your destination. So which would you rather do? Take 2 weeks on foot, make it there safe, or get in your car, drive around, and then get hijacked? Climate. Avoid bug out locations in climates with bad winters or desert-like conditions. I know I'm gonna get some blowback on this one, but I've lived in both kinds of location, and I'm pretty much gonna stick to this. So having lived in both locations, I would not pick either location for bugging out. And I know there are people with bug out locations in Arizona and Alaska that are reading this and think I'm full of it, but it's my story and I'm sticking to it. Admittedly, this is a personal choice. There isn't much room for error trying to survive a societal collapse in the desert or in an area with long, cold winters. Both climates are unforgiving. 7 reasons to avoid bug-out locations with harsh winters. Long, drawn-out winters limit gardening, which reduces the amount of food you can grow. And in extended periods, long-term SHTF without rule of law, your emergency garden is going to be really important. In locations like Alaska, the bounty of natural resources like fish and other game may be a leveling effect, but you'll be more like a hunter-gatherer than a settler, and living this way takes greater skill. So there's a lot of food in Alaska, but you have to know how to get it. You need a tremendous amount of fuel for heat in an area that's got bad winters. You have to have redundancies built in, like 2 heated structures. Solar doesn't work well, if at all. Everything freezes and equipment breaks. And during winter months, you may feel shut in, which isn't ideal for the psychological aspect of survival. I actually would rather live in Alaska or an area with bad weather than the desert. The desert, I've lived in the desert. I lived in Phoenix, outside of Phoenix for 10 years, and it is not an area where I would even consider going for long-term survival, and for the obvious reason, water. Deserts are a dangerous bug-out location if you haven't dotted your I's and crossed your T's. Water storage is a priority, and there is zero room for error. Have a method to manually pump water out of your well and plan for redundancy. Growing food in the desert is difficult, especially during winter months. If you've never been to a place like Arizona, if you've never been in Arizona summers, it's kind of hard to really relate to this without actually experiencing it. So growing food in the desert is tough. If you go this route, emulate Native American gardening techniques. Summers in the desert is like the winter in the northern states. People stay indoors in an air-conditioned room or by a swimming pool. So you won't have air conditioning. And this actually brings up another good point, which is southern Florida. I live in the Panhandle, northern Florida, but southern Florida didn't start becoming populated until much later because there was no air conditioning. I mean, it's, you really have to, we take air conditioning for granted. That's my point. Dependable year-round natural water sources are rare in most deserts. Or imagine surviving day after day in the middle of an Arizona summer with no air conditioning. You would be forced to stay in the shade. The area I lived in the Arizona desert had a monsoon season that dumped more than enough rainwater to get you through the year, but it takes thousands of gallons of storage to catch it. Once the monsoon season was over, rain was scarce. Take a look at the chart below to get a general idea of the weather and rainfall by state. Again, I'm not going to cover this. You'll have to read the article, readysquirrel.com. But I actually broke down average winter temperatures, average summer temperatures, and average annual rainfall, all 50 states. You can take a look at that if you want to. Keep in mind that the weather stations, may be a microclimate, so weather, rain, may vary by state in different regions within that state. Water supply, a bug-out location should have an excellent water supply. During societal collapse, there's a good chance that municipal water services won't be reliable or they'll shut down completely. You'll be out of luck if your water is a pump of electricity. There are examples of this in Venezuela. Watched a video. Certain areas have been without running water for years. One woman was talking about she was bringing buckets down to a dirty river to bring water back to boil it, and she'd been without running water for 8 years. So if you plan to rely on water catchment system, make sure there's enough average rainfall. Ideally, your camp will have natural water sources like streams, creeks, rivers, or freshwater lakes. 10 uses for water during a societal collapse: hydration, cooking food, including bulk staples, which if you're really gung-ho for the long term, the long haul, the heavy, hardcore, tried and tested staples, you need a lot of water because they all take water to make edible. Hygiene, sanitation, gardening, irrigation, animal husbandry, food processing, hydropower, aquaculture, and hydroponics. How much water do you need during a societal collapse or SHTF scenario? According to the United States Geological Survey, USGS, the average person in the United States uses 80 to 100 gallons of water per day for indoor home use. In an off-grid situation, you could probably get that down to 50 gallons. And maybe you could get that down to 5 gallons or 10 gallons if that's what you had to do to stay hydrated. But if you're going to be processing food and gardening and all that stuff and, giving water to livestock, you're going to need more water than that FEMA suggested 1 gallon a day. Based on the USGS calculation of water use per person, you would need access to 18,250 gallons per person at 50 gallons per day for 1 year. At 80 gallons, the number jumps to 29,200 gallons, and at 100 gallons, it increases to 36,500 gallons per person per year. Another chart, I'm not going to go through it, but it talks about how much water you need: 50 and 80 gallons per person and for 4 people. Redundancy, when you're preparing your bug out location for societal collapse, build redundancy into your bug out location and systems. All your emergency and survival systems should have at least one backup, i.e. if one method of getting water heating fails, have another system or method you can fall back on. Here's 10 examples of building food redundancy. Food storage and preparation, alternate methods of preserving food for SHTF: canning, pickling, drying, smoking, fermentation, salt curing. Alternate perishable food storage for SHTF: root cellar, ice house. This is actually kind of interesting. If you lived in a place like Alaska, close to a river where you could pull ice, it's actually doable. Survival garden, bug out location needs a survival garden to survive the societal collapse. Keep this in mind when looking for a bug out retreat. Providing all of your own food is hard, really hard. There's 3 soil types: loam, clay, sandy soil. Those are the 3 types, and then there's mixtures of the 3 types. Loam soil is the ideal. That's like Chernozem in the breadbasket, the Ukraine and Russia. The Midwest, states like Iowa and Nebraska, is loam. Most civilizations, successful civilizations that have sprouted up in areas that provide loam soil. So you think a place like Egypt, Egypt was on the delta of the Nile. The river was not channeled, so it would flood. It would leave the deposits, the premium soil from the river bottom, and so they were able to grow food. I'm not going to go into pros and cons of loam soil and these soils. You can go look at it. I will say this: I have sandy soil, hands down the worst kind of soil that you can have. A lot of people think it's clay soil, but it's not. Clay soil is actually extremely nutritious for plants. It's just not bioavailable. So by using natural materials, you can actually break that down and get it to move more towards the loamy side. So clay soil is not all bad. It can be fixed. Sandy soil, on the other hand, is the worst kind of soil you have. I literally have sand. I don't have sandy soil. I have like beach sand. So if I dig down underneath my grass, I can hold up a handful of sand. Population density. Avoid setting a bug out location in an area with high population density or on the direct path of a major exodus from a big city. I broke it down here. There's 20 states with the lowest population density per square mile. 20 states with the highest population density per square mile. Wow, look at New Jersey. 1,211 people per square mile. I lived in New Jersey for a while. No, I'm not from there, but I lived there. Wow. Wow. Okay, so 20 states with the highest population. Then I've got a state or a chart with all the states, population density per square mile, all 50 states. So you can kind of take a look at those. You can bounce this around, the weather around with population densities, average annual rainfall. You can narrow down the states in your general area. Natural hazards by states. I mean, for some people, this is a freak out. I live in Floribama. I live in an area that's been hit by more hurricanes than any other part of Florida. I think where I live, it's been hit by like 39 hurricanes since they started recording it. But I like the lifestyle, so that's, you're going to have to make some decisions on that. Yeah, so what do I want to say? So yes, I have hurricanes here, but where I lived before, I had winters. There were a lot of blackouts and there were a lot of blizzards. So you trade off, right? Like if you don't have electricity and it's 10 degrees below zero outside and you're not set up for it, that's pretty dangerous also. So you just have to weigh kind of what you want and what fits your situation. And this, I think the information in this article will give you what you need to make some pretty decent decisions. Choosing a bug out location, HOAs, covenants, land restrictions, and land use. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. Things that you want to look out for before you buy property. You want to know ahead of time what the HOA rules are. Know that some areas that look like they wouldn't have an HOA do. Some HOAs require that you build as soon, within a specific amount of time. You build the land. They limit what you can build on there. So you don't want to go buy 20 acres of property with an idea of, you want to live in a Viking longhouse that you build from your own wood and then find out that you can't do that. Some municipalities now require that you hook up to the grid. Also, that's another issue. So there's some ideas in there. I don't feel like reading all that, so I'm not going to. Some more ideas on purchasing properties. This actually, the HOAs, covenants, land restrictions, and purchasing property, that could probably have been one section. But it's basically something to browse over or take some notes on if you're looking for land. Security. The best security for a bug out location is invisibility. Look for locations that are well hidden by heavy brush, wooded areas, and geographical features like hills, valleys, or rock outcroppings. High ground with multiple means of coming and going is ideal. Don't get boxed into a canyon or on the edge of a cliff. Avoid placing bug out shelters in areas of edge, such as where a field and forest meet. People gravitate to these areas just like animals. Avoid putting a bug out shelter near these landmarks: railway, interstate or freeway, power line, trailhead, choke point, major bridges, and nuclear power plants. Crime. This is interesting, really. Avoid setting up camp in areas with high crime. Urban areas tend to have a lot of crime, right? Yeah, and you all are thinking about that, right? But crime is also high in some rural areas. Small town America has turned into meth central, so keep that in mind. Meth labs and prescription drug use are prevalent in parts of small town America, as is drug trafficking, so check things out before you go buying stuff. Camouflage for your bug out location. Plant trees and bushes around your property to act as concealment. Break up or cover right angles like the corners of buildings. Have shelters to put over effective glass windows, or shutters rather. Hide antennas and wind turbines. Build with natural materials or use netting. Avoid having anything exposed that is bright, shiny, reflective, or sticks out like a sore thumb. Shooting range. You want one? You want a shooting range? When I lived in Arizona, I could drive out to the desert and I could shoot literally anywhere and any kind of weapon. Where I live now, I have to drive 30 miles to shoot at an indoor range. That's a problem. Practice does make perfect. Ideally, I like shooting range on my bug out location, and I want access to public range that offers three-gun shooting, rifle, pistol, and shotgun. That's pretty interesting. If you don't know what it is, check it out. It's actually a competitive sport. Fuel and power. When setting up your bug out grid, be thinking about power out scenarios. You're going to need solar, wood, buried coal, or other dependable fuel. You may plan on roughing it, but you need to stay warm, cook food, and stay clean. Getting ready to live off-grid. Check out the Ready Squirrel article, 44 off-grid tools for emergency survival. Fuel and power, 3 off-grid power sources, wood, micro, hydro, solar, wind, and alternative fuel sources. Methane is fuel. That's kind of cool. If you've got pigs, you can make methane. Topography, an ideal bug out property has diverse terrain features. Topography, or the lay of the land, should provide flat areas to build structures, plant a garden, and for pastures. Hills and varied ground terrain add to your ability to stay hidden and create choke points for security. Avoid topography downstream of large dams or floodplains, or areas that are in an open plain that are visible from 360 degrees. Move or bug out. If you can move, move. If you can't, don't. I mean, it pretty much is that simple. 20 forms of transportation. I've got some ideas down here. Car, truck, horse, motorcycle, or dirt bike, ATV, motor scooter, bicycle, electric vehicles, wood gas vehicles, biodiesel, propane, utility trailer, RV, powerboat, sailboat, canoe, kayak, personal aircraft, livestock, hand carts, your own 2 feet. I like living close to water. I think it would also be beneficial to live somewhat close to a river that, one of the big ones like the Mississippi or the Missouri, that you could actually use a canoe or a kayak for to get around. Communication. All I'm going to say about communication is probably the only option is going to be ham radios. You're going to have to spend a lot of time, a lot of money to figure out what will work when the grid is down. When grid power goes down, if you don't have an alternate source of electricity, or even if you do, you're going to find that ham radios are not as effective because they basically run on booster stations that will not be operational. So good for short-term emergencies, but serious, hardcore, long-term emergencies, we're probably going to go back to the days of courier. People, look for land in an area where you have something in common with the locals, a community of like-minded individuals if possible. Get to know the neighbors. Why are they living remotely? Do you fit in, and will you feel comfortable? Are the locals assets in SHTF or an anchor? Explore an area before purchasing land. Eat at local restaurants. Talk to people and get the feel for the place. Talk to everyone you can to get inside information. It might surprise you what strangers will tell you if you put yourself out there. Hidden supply survival catches. They're a good idea. You should have supply catches buried on the way to your bug out location. Weapon catches, food, water catches. I'm not going to read all this. Again, readysquirrel.com. And hygiene and sanitation. You're going to want, at the very least, a latrine or an outhouse. And you're going to want a way to process water to keep disease down. Okay, that's it. Scott with Ready Squirrel. If you want to read this whole article, go over to readysquirrel.com and check it out. This is, I can't remember the title of the article. This is Societal Collapse, Guide to Picking a Bug Out Location.